Hey guys! Alright, so in this video we are going to focus on factoring expressions. And one part of that we have to remember before we can factor expressions is a term called factor pairs. We actually talked about this a lot at the beginning of the year this year when we were talking about greatest common factor. So a factor pair is two numbers that you multiply together to make another number. I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. And when we are factoring expressions, our goal is to make an expression look like the distributive property. And remember, the distributive property looks something like, I don't know, let's say like 3 with parentheses and then maybe x plus 5 on the inside. So our goal is for it to look something like this at the end, and we're not going to start with a problem that looks like that. All right, so first problem I'm going to walk you through as an example. I'm going to give you the steps and then we'll try a couple more together. All right, so let's say I have an expression. Remember, an expression is a math problem without an equal sign. So I've got this math problem. There's no equal sign. Now my goal is to make it look like the distributive property, and right now it doesn't. There's no parentheses. Now the way we're going to do that is we are going to find the greatest common factor. So over here, I'm just going to write like some steps for you. So I want to find the greatest common factor. Okay, so in order to do that, I am going to list both of my numbers, and I want to write down as many factor pairs, two numbers that multiply together to make either one of these. So I'm thinking, what two numbers multiply to make 15? What two numbers multiply to make 6? And I want to think of as many as possible. It doesn't matter the order they go in. So I know 3 times 5 makes 15. I don't need to write down 5 times 3. That's the same. And I also know 15 times 1. Don't forget those easy ones. 15 times 1 makes 15. Those are good. All right, and then 6, same thing. All right, I know 2 times 3 makes 6. I also know 6 times 1. Don't worry about any decimals or fractions. Just go for the whole numbers. All right, and now I'm looking for the greatest common factor, the largest number that is the same in both of these groups. So I see a 3 and a 3. All right, so far, I know my greatest common factor is 3. I have to use that to actually turn my problem into a distributive property problem. All right, so that was the first step. Second step is that I need to divide all parts of my expression by the greatest common factor. All right, so below here, I'm just going to write a line. This is where my answer is going to go. This number 3 that I circled, the greatest common factor, it's going to go on the outside of my parentheses. And step 2, where I said divide all of the parts of the expression by the greatest common factor, means up here, I'm going to divide each one of those parts by the number 3. And I'm going to write down what's left over inside the parentheses. So I'm going to focus on 15x divided by 3. The x part, just ignore. 15 divided by 3. I'm going to write down the answer, which is 5. Because there was an x here, I'm going to keep the x in the problem. All right, there's a plus sign. I'm going to put that back in the problem. And then I'm going to do 6 divided by 3. And I get 2. So the last part of my problem here, step 3, was that I put my leftovers in the parentheses. So after I divide, the leftover numbers, the answers, they go in the parentheses. All right, now I want to make sure that I actually did this correctly. So one way I want to do this is it looks like the distributive property. That was my goal. Now I also look at it And the numbers inside, I want to make sure I couldn't divide them even further to make them smaller, which means kind of like a fraction, like could I take something out of those two numbers again? I can't divide them both by a number, so here is my final answer. I factored it out. It started here. It ended like a distributive property problem, and I'm done. All right, so let's do another one. This one I'm going to show you has one more trick to it. And I'm doing that on purpose because on your practice, you will see where there's actually two variables. The problem is exactly the same, so don't worry about that. All right, so got my expression. First thing I need to do is find the greatest common factor. So I'm going to list both my numbers out. I want to find all the factor pairs. So I start listing them out. Maybe I start with the easy ones. Multiplying by 1. 5 times 2 also makes 10, and I know 5 times 5 makes 25. All right, so first was to find the greatest common factor. And when I look through my list, biggest number that's the same, 5 and 5. All right, so second, I need to divide. So I'm starting with this. I write down that number 5, my greatest common factor, put my parentheses out. I'm going to divide each part up here by 5. If you like to write out that 5 at the end, if that helps, that's fine. All right, so I do 10x divided by 5. 10 divided by 5 gives me 2, and I have to keep the x with it. Bring down the subtraction sign. All right, then I'm doing 25 divided by 5. I have 5 left over. There was a y up here, so the y has to go in my answer. Final answer. Again, I look inside, I have a 2 and a 5, just like I did up here. I know I can't make it any smaller, so my leftovers went into the parentheses. One other trick. Right here, where I found my greatest common factor, those numbers next to it actually end up being the numbers that are inside my parentheses. So that means when I did 10 divided by 5, my leftover was 2 and it was right there. I just had to put it in the parentheses. Same thing with 25 divided by 5 equals 5. So the answers are actually right there ready for you. You just have to use them. All right, and last one I have for you is 24y plus 88x. All right, so again, first thing I need to do is I need to start by writing out the two numbers and list all of my factor pairs, all numbers that multiply together to make those two numbers. So I've got 2 times 12, 8 times 3, 6 times 4. Can't forget that easiest one, 24 times 1. All right, I'm going to go to 88. This would be a great time for you guys to use your multiplication table. I included that in your online resources under the classwork tab, so if you wanted to reference that, that would be great. Most numbers that we're using will be on there, but not all of them. All right, so I've got 8 times 11, 88 times 1, 2 times, or I'm sorry, 42 times, oh goodness, 22 times 4, and 2 times 44. All right, again, I'm looking for greatest common factor first. Greatest common factor is my first thought so that I know what number I'm going to put on the outside of the parentheses. Looking through, there's quite a lot of matches. So I have C1 and 1. I have 2 and 2, but remember I'm looking for greatest, the number that's the largest. So largest that I see that matches is 8 and 8. All right, so 8 is my greatest common factor, which means I'm going to put an 8 on the outside of my parentheses. And now my job is to divide each part of the original problem by 8. And I'm going to put my leftovers in here. Now remember I said in that last problem that your answers are already here. So when I do 24 divided by 8, my answer is right there in the problem already. I can write down the number 3 and I've got to keep the variable with it. So the y stays. I put the addition sign back. 88 divided by 8. Again, my answer is right there. I don't even have to really think about it. 11 is left over. And I put an X at the end. Again, I look inside. I say to myself, could I divide 3 and 11 by a number that would make them both smaller? I can't. They don't have anything in common, which means I'm done. All right, so you have some practice with this today. You have 9 problems and a Google form so that you can fill it in for me to give you feedback. So go ahead and give that a try, and then I will be on Zoom at noon. You'll see a link in the Google Classroom for that. And then if you've got any questions about this or what you did on Monday, you can ask then. All right, see you soon.